Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy podcast. My name is Wanako Overhuber. I'm your host. My guest today is Megan Edge. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So thank you so much for joining me on this exciting journey, getting to know each other and walking each other home. So I like to ask a question. How did you come to see the world the way you do today?
Oh, I would say I was born into this vision. I'm very fortunate. I believe myself to be very fortunate that I was born into, or I chose a family to be born into that loves nature, has always been open to new ideas. My father was a journalist. We had a lot of critical thinking, lots of debate at the dinner table, a lot of opportunity to see the world from many different perspectives. And I was able to bring that experience, that childhood experience, into my adult life, where I continue to this day to be innately curious, constantly asking questions, much to the chagrin of those around me. And with a really firm belief that we can heal. We can heal anything that life throws at us, that other people throw at us, that as human beings, as a species, we have the innate ability for profound healing and transformation. And I bring that belief into everything I do, my work, raising my children, my friendships. It's a foundational belief for me.
That's a very, very important trust that you have in the ability to heal. And so I think that's in A Course in Miracles, for instance, it says that only errors are possible. They can be corrected. Any mistake or error can be corrected. So it's very interesting because many people have been brought up with the idea that there's a sin, and sin cannot be corrected. You can only I don't know, whatever. But anyways, the idea is that sin is something that stays, but an error or a mistake can be corrected. And so I think that's an important differentiation. And you're saying anything can be healed. That has a similar connotation to it.
Yes, I do believe anything can be healed if that's what we desire. When we put the intention forward, first, I suppose we recognize that we're uncomfortable in our skin. We're uncomfortable in the way that we're showing up in the world, that something doesn't feel quite right. And then we start down that path of self-exploration. And for some people, it can be the dark night of the soul. It can be a wake-up call shows up. Something triggers a response in the human being to search for meaning in what they have experienced in their lives. And it's that search for meaning and understanding that triggers the healing mechanism in our bodies. And it's not to say that every single person has to be 100% healed. I mean, I don't know what that would look like because everyone's journey is different. But healed to the point where a person can stand in their stories and their life experiences and say, this is who I am. These are the experiences that brought me to this place. And I recognize the value of those experiences. That's where my clients get to when we do the healing journey, is to that point of allowing their life experiences, whatever they happen to be, to have value and meaning and purpose in their lives as the foundation of that healing. And the idea that you were just sharing about sin being untreatable, I haven't heard that before. And I find that very sad that somebody could go through their lives, believing that they have sinned, and then being convinced that there's nothing to be done about it except atone, but there's no real healing from it. Because like you say, what is a sin except for a mistake? And if you can understand the reason for the mistake and what was underneath the need for that mistake to happen in the first place, then it can be healed.
Yes, that's the big difference, right? And it's a very different idea of forgiveness, right? When you say it can be corrected, then things that have happened in the past do not become your stigma forever, or something that you cannot change or you cannot live with anymore. Because if it's something you cannot live with anymore, that means that you will not be able to heal from it either. You won't be able to move on. You won't be able to be happy ever again, or at least have something holding you back from a greater happiness than you experienced before. And so it's a big thing, because the idea that all these mistakes, as we were calling them, accumulate and cannot be corrected, in the sense of being a sin that cannot be changed, means that you will only become sadder and sadder and unhappier and unhappier. So the idea that you actually can heal from anything, or that mistakes can be corrected, makes a huge difference in our lives.
Absolutely does. And what it really speaks to is a mindset. And we have this amazing brain and we have this amazing mind. And there's a difference between the brain and the mind. I mean, the brain is that physical thing that we carry around in these noggins of ours. The mind, as described by the Seth material, if you're familiar with it, with that material, is that the whole body is the mind, because the mind is a feeling organ. It feels into all of our experiences, and it gives us information about how we are responding to those experiences. So if we have been brought up, perhaps culturally or religiously, with a belief that there's sin and we can sin, that we are intrinsically not good, we're born into sin, that kind of messaging is very damaging. I believe, this is my own opinion about it, it can be very damaging to the whole experience of being a human. But we do have these amazing minds, and we can change our minds about the things that we believe to be true about ourselves. And in that way, we can heal our relationship with the story that we've been telling ourselves and others about our value and our purpose and our meaning in this world. But it does take that switch of mindset, that willingness to allow ourselves to see the world perhaps differently than the way we think is the only way to see the world. And so there's definitely some flexibility that needs to be there, and perhaps even some muscles in the mind that need to be exercised, need to be trained away from a particular kind of limiting belief or thinking into something that's much more expansive as part of that healing process.
Yes, that's really important to be able to change one's mind. Of course, in Miracles, it also says you can't change the world, but you can change your mind. And you can get help for that. So you can get the help of the Holy Spirit, as of Course in Miracles uses that term to describe the right mind. So right-mindedness. And that is something that we do have available to us. So yeah, it's a huge, huge difference to the idea that our idea of separation could be something that can't be changed, which is the idea of sin, right? Because yeah, that's it.
Excuse me. Right, because isn't the original sin the separation between God and man, or God and people, or and that in our humanness we have somehow sinned just by existing? And that's one idea. It's one way to look at it. It's not every Christian idea of how to look at it, though. And I was not trained in a Christian background, but I have done a lot of religious studies, a lot of research into different belief systems around the world in a desire to understand, like, what is really happening in people's minds around belief and the power of belief and the things that people do based on belief, the way they treat one another for good or not good. I was thinking about this actually before we met, before we got on the podcast, which was that in as much as human beings have the capacity to be completely awful to one another, we equally, and perhaps even more importantly, have the capacity to be incredibly loving and wonderful and trusting and supportive of one another. And so if we can choose to tap into that potentiality of goodness within the human soul, imagine what we could accomplish as a species.
Yeah, that's a huge, huge endeavor, and but it's something that would make a huge difference. And also, one of the things that Course in Miracles says is that we all can be perfectly happy. That's also the will of God for us. Now, not that I experience that or can say that I know that that is true, except from some experiences where I've felt that, but it wasn't lasting. So the idea of that is a very beautiful one, that that's our true nature, and our true will is to be perfectly happy, and it is ours to have. And that the source that we come from actually is perfectly happy, and therefore we are in truth. Now, to change your mind about everything and say, okay, I'll see it in the way in which I'm perfectly that makes me perfectly happy, that is a huge thing. How does one do that? And what are your experiences? And maybe you'd like to share some of your journey of how you came to this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you're saying that, something pops into my mind that was really profound for me when I was at a young age, around 17 or 18. And my parents had separated, and then they were in the process of divorcing. And I had this knowing, this awareness that my parents were two people, and that as people, they had the opportunity to grow. They could either grow together as a couple, or they could grow in different directions. And in their case, they were starting to grow in different directions. And so instead of feeling anger towards them for the choices that they had to make at that time, or feeling victimized by my circumstances because my life was changing, my household was changing, everything that I thought I knew about my parents was changing, I chose to feel incredible empathy for what each of them was going through, and to allow myself some understanding about how difficult those decisions were for them to make. And so I was able to see them as two human beings doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. And that was very deeply impactful for me. And I was able to then look around at all of my relationships and decide that that's how I wanted to experience every relationship that I had, is that understanding that the higher self, or the soul, or whatever you want to call it, that energy of ourselves that is bigger and greater than what is housed in these bodies, is in itself infinitely, I hesitate to use the word perfect because we put such onus on that word, but it is infinitely unflawed. And then we come into this human experience and we get to have all the experiences of being a human being. So as I moved through my life, as I started adulting, leaving home and starting university and living on my own, I was always looking for opportunities to show people that there's a different way to interact with one another. There's a different way to interrelate with each other. And that if you're having problems with somebody, you can beseech their higher self or their soul self and have a conversation with that part of themselves. As I grew up, as I moved through university and settled down and had my babies and got married and had my babies and did all of that and pursued different careers. I was a bank teller. I was a horticulturalist. I did I did home care for a while, for a time, did lots of different things. I always had that thought in the back of my mind of, how can I help? What can I do to help somebody? How can I make their experience different or better, or just put a hand on their shoulder? How can I help them? And it occurred to me one day, after many experiences of things like being in the bank lineup or being on the bus and having complete strangers come and talk to me and tell me all their problems, and then knowing somehow to say something that was going to be helpful for them, that this actually could be the work I do. This could be my work, is helping people in this way. So I started to take all sorts of studies. I'd already been studying healing and metaphysics and spirituality for a very long time. but I started to do it in a more concentrated way with an aim to put a shingle out to say, I am a healer and you can come here and we can do healing work together, and we can make your experience of your life different than maybe how you've been living it to that point. And once I did that, once I put out my shingle, my healer's shingle, so many beautiful experiences flowed from there. I created courses and workshops, and I taught other people how to become healers. And I've been on so many people's journeys as they come to that dark night of the soul and make that conscious decision that it's time to change something in their lives, and they want to be a part of that process. They want to be an active participant in their own healing journey. I've created tools to help people with that. I've created, again, like courses, classes, workshops. I love for people to have the tools that they need to do this work so that they don't feel alone and they don't feel isolated when they're doing it. And through that time, I've encountered many very challenging experiences in my life. I've lost loved ones in very dramatic ways, lost homes. There's been, it's the human experience, the human life. But through it all, I tried my best to walk my talk and to apply to myself the same healing tools and the same healing modalities and beliefs that I offer to my clients and my students as we move forward.
Yes, that's an important aspect of healing work, is to apply it to yourself. And of course, we automatically do in a way, but we're not always aware of what we're applying. So it also goes into the work with other people, of course. So what we're applying, and of course, in Miracles, it says, teach what you want to learn. So if you don't teach what you want to learn, you're not going to learn it. Or give everything so that you have everything. So give what you want to have, because that's the only way to have it. So these are all these principles that you're also sharing about in your own words. So
I love what you're saying. What the Book of Miracles, or the Course in Miracles says about learn what you want to teach, or teach what you want to learn. Because what I've done throughout my whole life is, whenever I have found something, a new modality, a new healing technique, a new herb, a new whatever it is, as soon as I understand it and I experience the benefit of it and the value of it, I want to share it. I want other people to have it. And it's not necessarily going to work for them in the same way that it worked for me, or it might work for my client, from one to the other. But I feel like the more tools that I have in my healer's toolkit, the better able I am to hold space for somebody in that healing journey. And then to sort of to give away what you want is very much like the potlatch mentality of our Indigenous cultures here that practice the potlatch, which is that you give away. You give away in order to increase your wealth. You don't hoard it altogether. And I feel it's the same with experiences. The more experiences I can share, it's not going to help everybody, but it might help one person. And that one person could make all the difference in the world with what they've learned.
Another idea from A Course in Miracles is that you never heal alone. So there's no healing or nothing of that sort that happens that is only for yourself or only applies to yourself. So it's always many who are touched by it. And I think that's one of the things you were saying, this giving what your experiences, sharing them, so on, increases the value of it. And therefore it also stays with you. It becomes stronger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a ripple effect. And the way that I like people to visualize this is that when they are embarking on their healing journey, or just in their everyday well-being, if they can visualize themselves as sitting or standing or floating in the middle of a pond with beautiful crystal clear water, not a ripple in it, and that every act of self-care sends out a ripple, and that ripple will go until it bumps into something, or someone. And when that ripple bumps into someone, if that person is welcoming or able to be open to it, consciously or unconsciously, that ripple will go into their energy field. And you can see the visualization of it, right? The ripple goes out and then it bounces back, and then it goes out and bounces back. There isn't any single act that we do that doesn't have that ripple effect. And so that's why I'm saying, if rather than focusing in on how negative things can be between people, if we can focus in on even one act of kindness a day, that ripple effect goes out and can have miraculous results.
Is there a particular story you like to tell to explain the way you see the world?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. A particular story for how I see the world. You know, people have often, I've received feedback from people that I am sometimes can be naive in my dreams for people to be kind to one another. And I've often said, why can't we just get along? And I get that we can't always get along. I can see that there are gulfs between people that are so great that it can be difficult to overcome. It's not impossible, of course, but it can be difficult. And I've come to appreciate, as I've gotten older, that not everybody sees the world the way that I see it, or experiences the world the way that I do. Because I've heard that a lot from other people. It's like, I don't understand how you can see the world that way. Can't you? You turn on the news and you see how awful it is. Well, so yeah, because that's the focus of intention. If I turned on the feel-good news and all I got to see were amazing stories of amazing people doing amazing things and helping each other out and community building and all of that, then it would be easy to see the world the way that I see it. And I think at this point, I believe this is just how I was born. I was born an optimistic person with perhaps a naivety for what's possible with human beings, or maybe I know it from somewhere else and I'm tapping into it and I'm channeling it to challenge people's beliefs about what is possible in love and relationship and in healing. What happens so often when a client walks into my healing room is the first thing they do is burst into tears, because it's the first time that they have felt so safe and so welcomed and without any judgment. And that's nothing that I say or do. It's just it's not just, it's the energy that I hold. I suppose that when they come into my energy field, like that ripple effect I was talking about, they feel safe. And when they feel safe, they can let down their guard and they can be vulnerable. And that's a really great place to start. And so story after story of clients and students having these amazing breakthroughs, these amazing experiences, because there's a safe space for them to do that, whether it's in person or it's online. I mean, the energy doesn't particularly care. I've had people who've come to me, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn. I'm saying this because I want people to understand what's possible, right? I've had people come to me who've been on antidepressants for decades. And through the course of our work, they're able to take themselves off of those antidepressants because they don't need them anymore. I've had people who've been at the brink of ending their lives. And through the work that we do, they come back and they decide they want to embrace their life. There's so many examples of this. And again, it's not, yes, I am doing that. I'm doing the work in that I have the tools and I have the capacity to hold their stories and then to empower that person, that client or that student or that friend or whomever to see what is possible for them, right? And that's always happened for me. It's just the way that these are just the experiences that come around me when I'm in that mode of putting out that healing energy into the world. So there isn't any one particular story. There's just so many of them.
Yeah, many people like to use stories to explain things, or these very metaphoric stories, or even parables, as Jesus Christ did, or there's others who use that. So I thought you might have one of those. Yeah, in the tip of your tongue. But anyways, yeah, this is really, really important. The idea of being able to embrace each other without needing to judge or to put someone in the spot or make them feel small or bad, but to actually feel equal, to feel welcomed. Because in A Course in Miracles, it also uses the idea for relationships. There's the special relationship, the holy relationship. And so that it depends on how we are seeing each other, which one we are experiencing, not on what the other person is like.
That's, yeah, absolutely. And okay, so when we're talking parables, I do have a favorite story. I will share this one because this is one that I share often. You said earlier in our conversation that healing isn't done by oneself. Like, it isn't done all alone. There's lots of people in the world who can help. And that's true. Healing should not be a solitary journey. Certain aspects of the journey are solitary, but the whole journey itself, there are people who help, who can help, or who show up to help. There's always this, people talk about the angel who showed up in the guise of a person to help with some situation. My favorite one is, that's I don't know what the name of the parable is, but it's the one where the man is sitting on his roof, the floodwaters are rising, and he beseeches God and says, please save me. And a few minutes later, a rowboat comes by, and the person in the rowboat says, hop on in, come on, I'll get you off the roof. And he says, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. Okay, fine, I won't save you then. Speedboat comes by, same scenario. Helicopter arrives, same thing. The floodwaters rise. He gets to the pearly gates and he says, why didn't God help me? I beseeched God. And St. Peter says, we sent you a rowboat. We sent you a motorboat. We sent you a helicopter. What more did you want us to do for you? And I feel like that is such a great example of how, when we beseech whomever, whatever, it's the universe, it's God, it's the goddess, whoever is you pray to, when you say that, you then have to be aware of those opportunities that show up for you in answer to that prayer or that beseechment, right? That's being the active participant in your own healing journey. It doesn't happen any other way. You don't cry for help and then sit and twiddle your thumbs and rock on the rocking chair on the front porch and hope it shows up. It will show up, but then you have to get out of the rocking chair and you have to go with it, right? And that's what I see happening so many times when people come to work with me, is that they have either not seen the opportunity for help that's been there, or they have taken advantage of the opportunity for help, but it hasn't been the right fit for them yet. It hasn't yet addressed the source of what's holding up their pain, or what's holding up their trauma. And maybe it's that what's been missing is that spiritual component, or a bigger picture perspective on things, or an understanding that we're not here to do this alone. And then that becomes the action that they take to participate fully in their healing and their well-being. It's not just the healing. I mean, somebody doesn't have to come to me because they need to be healed. They can come to me because they want to be well. They want to learn ways to be well in their lives and to thrive in a different way than they had before. So when that rowboat shows up, get in.
Yes, that's a component of all of the asking for help, is that it often comes in a different way than we want it to be. And so yeah, it can be a challenge to accept help in a different way than we have been imagining it. And that can be something that holds us back. Yes, it's very true. And so yeah, that's an important parable to speak about that subject. Yeah. Okay, let's use this opportunity. Does someone have a question or comment at this point for us? No? Okay, then let's continue. So, going even deeper into this issue of accepting help and asking for help. Now, some teachings want you to ask for help in a certain way. Others say it's whether it comes from your heart or not. And another one will say, are you ready? Do you really want it? And all these questions that are asked in connection with that. Now, what is your experience? What really works for you and the people you work with?
Something that pops into my mind as you're asking that question is the story about the little boy who cried wolf. I have had the experience with clients who have come to see me who, while they are asking for help, they aren't yet ready or willing or committed to changing what needs to be changed in themselves or their way of thinking or their way of being in the world. And they return with the same story, the same complaint, the same unresolved issue. And at that point, that's when I would say to a client, I think we're stuck here. I think we're not moving forward. And I would invite them to consider maybe stopping for a while or going down a different road, with somebody else, in order to give them a different perspective in an effort to get them out of that sort of crying wolf syndrome. Like, things are so bad, but I don't want to change anything, but I want someone to hear me complain about how bad it is. When someone truly asks for help, it's coming from more than their heart, although it's heartfelt. In my experience, it's coming from their solar plexus. It's coming from their gut. It's something that it's so needed and so required that they are drawn to the facet of healing by their solar plexus. Because the solar plexus in our bodies is where we hold the energy of relationships. And anytime a person asks for help, they're engaging in a relationship, right? Whether it's with somebody that they've never met before, like a counselor or a therapist or a doctor, or somebody they've known for a really long time, that ask for help changes the dynamic of that relationship and of that interaction. And like I was saying before, if a person, they want the help, but they're just not ready yet to do the work that's required from the help, or the level of help that is being offered is more than they have the capacity to know what to do with, then they will continue on their path in a similar vein to how they have been until something changes for them. I know for myself personally, asking for help is not an easy thing. And so I understand that it's not an easy thing for a lot of people to ask for help, because in the asking for help, we are in a vulnerable space. And some people may have the experience of where they've asked for help in the past, they've sincerely wanted it, and they were ridiculed, or they were shamed, or they were somehow made to feel embarrassed about that asking for help. So when I say to my clients, when I acknowledge with my clients how courageous it is to ask for help, I mean that from the bottom of my heart and my solar plexus, because it really takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to say, I can't do this on my own. And I think it's unfortunate that in our culture, in at least North American culture, many North American cultures, it's not okay to ask for help. We're not given permission to ask for help. We have to do it ourselves. We have to be stoic, stiff upper lip, and all that narrative. Whereas there are other cultures where community comes together to help almost before the ask is made. Right. But for most of my clients, they've had to get to a place in their life where they realize they cannot do this by themselves any longer, and they really need that help. And then once there's that understanding that help is required, the intention goes out into the world, and synchronicities start to happen that create the ability for that person to do that work and to have that healing from the first ask or the first acknowledgement that they need help, that they can't do it anymore by themselves, nor should they have to. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, there's also the one side is that someone doesn't find a way to be able to use the help that is given for themselves, or are not willing to do it in the way that is offered. Right? And then there's also the side of those who just have something that's keeping them from being able to do that. Right. And then it's a matter of discovering what that is, right? What is actually holding them back? Because I don't think most people won't go and ask for help with the intention not to accept the help. They may not be able to for some reason
Yes,
or other.
yeah, that's very, very true. Absolutely. There's lots of reasons why a person may not be at a point in their life or have the capacity to accept the help when it is offered. And I don't mean to be disparaging of somebody who was still very much embodying their circumstances or their situation. There is a psychology around illness, and whether that's mental illness or physical illness or injury, though, where a person can become so comfortable in their discomfort and they can identify so strongly with what their prognosis, diagnosis, dis-ease is, and they receive benefit in different ways for showing up with that circumstance or that disease or that illness, that when presented with the possibility of becoming completely pain-free or disease-free, it's a scary prospect, because they don't know who they would be without the identifier of that disease or that illness. And so when we do the kind of healing work that I do, I'm less interested in someone's symptoms as I am in what's holding up the situation. Right? Where is it coming from? Where is the need for the illness and injury? And this is a deep layer kind of healing. And it's always done with the greatest acknowledgement for the journey that the person is on and the choices that they've made in their lives. It's not done from a place of, you shouldn't have this cancer, or you shouldn't have broken your leg, or anything like that. It's about understanding the body's need, the way in which the body is trying to communicate its needs through the disease, illness, or injury that is showing up. Once we can come to an understanding of what's holding that up, what emotional, energetic situation, trauma, belief is holding that need, we can do the work there at that level to relieve the body of its attempts to communicate with the mind about what it requires. And this is an approach to healing that is, I would say, not mainstream.
Yeah, there's a lot of helpful approaches to healing, that's for sure. And there's also some that may perpetuate the illness or whatever, the ailment or whatever. Of course, because there's all kinds. So another thing is also finding something that actually tips the scale so that you become motivated. Now that's also something in education and in many other areas of life. What tips the scale so that you're motivated to go after something or go for something, rather than saying there's no way out of it?
And that's where people find themselves in that dark night of the soul, or the wake-up call. And what I mean by a wake-up call is something that happens in your life that you cannot ignore. it's getting your attention in a way that you couldn't possibly imagine. It's so what's the right word? Like it stops you in your tracks. It stops you in your tracks. It could be a diagnosis of an illness. It could be a diagnosis of cancer, and you suddenly have to reassess your entire life and belief system and way of being in the world. It could be a car accident. That was my experience. It was a car accident that precipitated then the big wake up call, which was around my marriage and what was happening in my marriage. And it was the car accident, I believe it could have been a lot worse, but it didn't have to be, because it was enough to get me to stop. I had to stop. And when I stopped, I couldn't be so busy. And when I couldn't be so busy, I couldn't distract myself from the things that were going on in my life any longer. And then I had to actually look at them. Right? That's what the wake up call is. It provides you with an opportunity to stop and really decide for yourself, to make that informed decision. Is this the way I really want to be living my life? And what else is possible? And it's often in those moments of that dark night of the soul, or that wake up call, where people start to reach out for information, for guidance, for support. And maybe they come across A Course in Miracles, or they come across the Seth material. They come across, any number of writers and authors who through those authors, through those healers, they get to see how things could be different. Right. And all along the way, they get to decide which action to take, which direction to take. But again, it comes all the way back. It circles back to the asking. And in my experience, the wake up call shows up when you're not necessarily asking the most pointed questions, or you're not seeing the direction. You're not seeing the rowboat showing up, right? And you're not seeing the motorboat. You're not seeing the helicopter coming to the roof to pluck you off and save you. But, excuse me, you're not yet ready to go. So the universe or God or whomever drops that wake up call into your lap. And then you get to decide what to do with it.
In your experience, are there wake up calls that are ones that are so beautiful that you then can't tolerate the unhappiness that you've been living with so long with?
Absolutely. A wake up call doesn't have to be a traumatic experience. A wake up call could be somebody coming into your life in a loving way that you never expected before. It could be that promotion that you didn't know was coming, but you always hoped it was. And now opportunity is presenting itself to you in a way that completely lifts you up. That can be as terrifying to somebody, though, as the other kind of wake up call, And like I was saying earlier, I believe we are actively participating in our lives, whether we're aware of it or not, at an unconscious level. And so we put out ahead of ourselves the desire for the change that we need to have in our lives. And if it needs to be a beautiful, joyful experience, then that's what it will be. It doesn't have to be a really difficult one. It just, for a lot of people, it often is, only because that's where they've gotten themselves to in their lives. And that's what's required to wake them up and give them a shake. But it can equally be something absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And in my experience, that's what it was. There was the car accident that slowed me down, but it was somebody coming back into my life in a brand new way that opened my heart. And it was the heart opening that was, in fact, the wake up call. So yes, absolutely, it can be a beautiful experience. And once you've had that experience, there is no going back, right? That's the key thing about healing. And when I talk about deep and transformational healing, permanent healing, that's because once you have experienced a deep sense of wellness and a deep sense of belonging and a deep sense of loving, you can't go back to the old way of thinking. You cannot go back to the old way of being. You might try, but I guarantee you it's not going to work. And when we were talking earlier about that ripple effect and how when you are in a space of doing your healing work or being in an intention of well-being, and that ripple effect goes out, the people around you are impacted by that as well. So even they can't go back to the old ways of knowing you when you are going through that kind of transformation. And that's gorgeous. I think that's the most beautiful part of it.
Yeah, so you were speaking of there's fear of change, there's fear of the positive change, the fear of something going right, and there's the fear of something going wrong, and all these different types of fears that come up. What is your view of what role that plays in the healing journey?
Well, it plays a really important role, because when fear shows up, you can either be afraid, or you can see that emotion, that fear, a response, as an ally. And you can work with that fear to better understand why it's showing up in the first place. So for example, let's say that beautiful relationship has shown up in your life, and you're so fearful of it because it's so good. It feels so good. What are you afraid of? Right? Are you afraid that it won't last? Are you afraid that they're going to see through you? Are you afraid that there could be many things that you are afraid of. The question that I would want you to ask yourself is, why am I afraid of that? Why am I afraid of that? What if it only lasts for a little while? What if it only lasts for 5 years and then something changes? Then I've had an amazing 5 years. I've had the experience of love. Now I know what it feels like. I can find it again, or it can find me again, because now I'm in that vibration, right? Let's say it's a cancer diagnosis. I'm afraid to die. Why? What do you believe about death that has you so terrified that you're willing to put yourself through toxic treatments in an effort to survive? The fear opens up, it can open up a dialogue between you and yourself about what you believe, about what you deserve, about what you value in life, about what's important to you. So the fear is showing up as an opportunity for you to have that conversation. It's an instrument of exploration. If you can look at fear as an instrument of exploration, you can then work with it. And like I said before, you can make it your ally. That kind of fear. I don't mean being fearful of walking down a dark alley. That's a survival instinct. Don't walk down the dark alley. But when we're talking about an emotional response to something, and you say, I'm too afraid. Well, let's look at that. Let's break that down. Let's understand where that's coming from. Whose voice is that? It gives us a place to start doing some of that clearing work so that you can embrace that beautiful life that you actually deserve. It is your birthright, right? But so many people don't see that or know that. And so that fear shows up. But it's just showing up as a way to help you better understand if you're willing to see it from that perspective.
Another important topic is the worthiness and the ability, right? When you're capable of something, and the question of worthiness. Now there's so many people like to split the two, right? You're worthy no matter what, and independent of what your abilities or capabilities are. And then there's the others who want to see worth in the capabilities. And then bringing the two together. Now, how do you maneuver this whole conundrum? Because it can go into any direction and can have very negative effects on our well-being.
Absolutely. And I would say that I believe that here in North America, Canada, the United States, we have a very strong shame and blame culture. And we see it in social media, but we also see it in relationships, and we see it in families, and we see it as a control dynamic. To shame someone or to blame, those experiences get in the way of worthiness, especially shame. Shame is a big one, and it's almost invisible at times, but it's so what's the right word? Like predominant. It's in our conversations. We shame ourselves with self-deprecating talk. We shame others by judgment of their actions without really walking a mile in their own shoes. And that conversation of worthiness and capacity, I don't think they can happen without an understanding of the role that shame can play at a very deep level in our psyches from a very, very early age on. I mean, an adult who hasn't experienced being shamed as a child is less likely to allow themselves to be shamed than somebody who as a child was shamed growing up, and they just expect that from people, right? So getting underneath that shame and that blame and finding the source of the worthiness of the person is a whole healing modality in and of itself. There's a technique that I work with, which is essentially a deep dive into what is the belief that is holding up the sense of unworthiness. And we work through layer upon layer upon layer of belief until we hit the core belief. And an example of this is a client of mine. She believed that she was completely unworthy of love and that ultimately no one wanted her. That's what part of what she came to me with. That's a lot to unpack. And through the course of many sessions and body work and energy work and this technique, I got her to the point where she could put words to it. She didn't think she belonged here on the planet because she had been told as a child that her mother's pregnancy of her was a mistake. And so what she had embodied from that was that she was a mistake. Once we identified that belief, that core limiting belief, once she could say, I believe I am a mistake, then she could let it go. Then she could release it, because then she could question it. She could question its validity. And from that point forward, her healing accelerated exponentially because no longer was there that anchor of believing that she was a mistake. That was a belief she'd had since she was in vitro, or since she was in her mother's uterus. She held that belief to be true about herself. So that the arena of worthiness is an incredibly important part of any healing work that we do, because if the healing work is going to stay, there has to be an intrinsic belief in one's worth, and that one has reason to be here, and that they have meaning, that their lives has meaning.
Yeah, this is a very important subject. Also, the debate about our capacity or our capabilities. Now, we have so many capabilities, but many of them we don't think they're valuable, right? Or we have things that we're not good at, and we think they are debilitating, or could be impossible to live with. Now, and then we have a whole lot of capabilities that are the same as everyone else, right? And so they feel like, oh, they're trivial, so we don't value them. So there's a huge thing about what are we capable of, and you were saying we're capable of healing no matter what. Now, and that's just one of the things you were saying about this. Now the question is, where do we go with this? Because there's so much around it, tenseness and a lot of insecurities and fears and discounting of things and not seeing things, and then seeing other things as if they were huge and other things as if they were small. And so and we also have all this debate about saying thank you or being thankful for this. Now, where do we move with all of that? Because it's a huge field of things that we have been told to do this or that.
So where it's coming from is this need to compare ourselves to other people. And that's a self-judgment piece. So if we're going to talk about shame and blame, then we also have to talk about judgment and our self-judgment, the I'm not good enough statement, right? So-and-so can do this and I can't do this, therefore I'm not good enough. Here's the bottom line. I'm not going to be good at everything. Oh my gosh. How could I possibly be good at everything? I don't have enough time in this lifetime to be good at everything. And the fact that I'm not as good as somebody else is in something, let's say somebody's a better race car driver than I am. I'm not a race car driver. I would love to be. That's why I'm using this as an example. They call me Mummy Andretti's because I love taking those turns. But I'm not a race car driver. And probably in this lifetime, I'm not going to become a professional race car driver. So somebody out there is a better driver than I am. But somebody out there is also a worse driver than I am. And I can say this with conviction because I used to be the sort of person that compared myself to others all the time. Unconsciously, I didn't even realize that I was doing it. This was part of what I had to heal in myself, was this sort of, this unconscious need to compare myself to others as a way of valuing myself. I don't do that anymore. At least most of the time I don't. And if I do, I catch myself and I give my head a little shake and go, hang on a second. That's not healthy. That's not a healthy way to be in the world. The things that I can do are the things that I can do. I used to say to clients and students, if I can do it, you can do it. And I don't say that anymore because it's actually not true. There are things that I can do in the way in which I do them that somebody else cannot do in the way in which I do them. They can do them in the way they do them or not do them at all. One of the things that I teach my healer students, is this whole idea of non-judgment and of not comparing themselves to others. Once we stop comparing ourselves to others, once we stop being so judgmental of our own capacities, then it's like a huge weight gets lifted off our shoulders. Because we spend a lot of energy, or at least we can spend a lot of energy comparing ourselves to others. You know, that person's a better mom than I am. That person's a better writer than I am. That person's a better blah, 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 fill in the blank. I don't have a lot of time for that anymore in myself. Certainly if it shows up in myself, I don't have time for it. So I'll have a little conversation with myself. But even when clients come to me in my healing work that I do now, I will be very blunt with somebody. I will call them out on every self-deprecating sentence or statement that they make about themselves to get them aware of the language that they're using when they describe themselves and what's possible for them. And words have incredible power. So if anybody out there is wondering, how do I do this? How do I go from comparing myself to others and feeling down on myself to feeling confident and knowing that I'm doing me, right? Look at the language that you're using. Look at the words that you're using. There are high vibration words and there are low vibration words. The high vibration words are the ones that you want to be working with. You want to be using words like challenged instead of hard. Because when you say the word hard, it's just hard. It stops, nothing happens. But when you say this is challenging, well, that's a totally different energy. You can feel it. A challenge, you rise to the challenge. It's kind of exciting. What can I do with this challenge? There's all kinds of words that you can work with that raise your vibration so that you move out of that quagmire of judging others and judging yourself and comparing yourself to others. And you step into showing up in the world, allowing yourself to be seen instead of getting noticed. That was one of my challenges as well, moving from trying to get noticed to just being seen, and then allowing people to have their experience of me. Whatever it is, whatever their experience of me is, has nothing to do with me. It has to do with them. I would like it to be a nice experience, but it isn't always going to be, right? I mean, in the same way that you can't be good at everything, you're not going to be everyone's friends, but you can be kind and you can be respectful, even if you're not, best buds with the person. And all of these shifts in thinking about the way that you're relating to people are part of that self-healing and moving into that higher vibration. So that when the world throws stuff at you, which it will, it always will, you can navigate it differently than how maybe you're navigating it now, coming from a place of confidence and a sense of integrity and authenticity, rather than spending a lot of energy worrying about what other people think of you or putting yourself down because you don't think you're good enough.
Wow. And we have come to a point where we need to wrap up. Is there a question I haven't asked you that you would like to answer? You haven't unmuted yourself, so I don't hear what you're saying.
Sorry, I knew that was going to happen at least once. Trying to keep track of the mute and the unmute. I was saying, what a great question. Is there a question that you haven't asked me yet? There's probably many. I feel like this has been a really good conversation. I feel like we've touchstoned on a lot of really important aspects and pieces of the healing journey. I suppose an ending question could be, what does healing look like? Right? Because it's one thing for me to say, I believe everyone can heal. But what does that actually look like? My healing, when I consider myself to be in a healed space and in a space of wellness, isn't necessarily going to be the same as somebody else's. And I don't think you have to be fully healed in order to be a fully complete human being, because, like I say, life's always going to throw stuff at you. You can be in a good place so that it is easier to navigate what life throws at you. And, for somebody who's a paraplegic and in a wheelchair and can't move the bottom part of their body, being fully healed may not mean I can walk again. Right? There may be something else that will give that person a sense of healing, of feeling healed, of feeling content with their lives, or whatever it might be. So in answer to my own question that you didn't ask me, I believe that each person's experience of healing and when they can finally say, I am healed, is going to be different for everyone. There's no benchmark. It's for you personally. What does it feel like when you feel healed?
I like that. There's a question that comes from the solution-focused approach, is if a miracle had happened while you were sleeping, how would you notice that it had happened when you get up and then you start describing the morning and everything, the whole thing that goes on? How would you notice it? What would be different, and so on and so forth? I think that's an important question to ask when it comes to what would healing look like for you. So
yeah, great question. That's a great exercise. As you were asking it, the first thing that came into my mind is ease. It would feel easy. It would be easy to get up. It would be easy to move around. Things would come easily because the resistance was gone. That would be the miracle. If the resistance is gone, life is a lot easier because we're not sabotaging ourselves any longer. So I think it would feel flow. That's what it would feel if a miracle happened in the night. It would feel like flow.
it would be concrete things like that. Get up easily, that your spouse smiles at you in the morning, or whatever, right? There's all kinds of things that people come up with when they get that question. But the more detail there is, the better, right? So and I think that's a beautiful question from the solution-focused approach in psychology and psychotherapy. So, yeah. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me on this journey of walking each other home. Thank you for joining everyone who's with us, whether today or another time. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining this journey. Please share about the podcast, review it, let people know about it. And if you know someone who would be a good fit or who would feel like would be great to be here, or if you are that person, please reach out to me so that you can be on the podcast as well, because I think the diversity of how many different perspectives we get on how we came to see the world the way we do today, and the beauty of a message of love is empowering to everyone. So thank you all. Blessings.
Thank you.